There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman Podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Western Huntsman Podcast, brought to you by Eastman's Hunting Journals. This is Jim Huntsman, your host, coming at you from the Broken Tine studio right here in Clark Fork, Idaho. Snowy Clark Fork, Idaho, that is. I was just talking to the guest we're having on today, and we were actually supposed to record this 2 nights ago, and instead we had, the blizzard from hell come in and knock our power out and everything. So Jordan Sillars is joining me today. He's a writer. And he wrote a really good article regarding, well, the article name is Inside the Campaign to Divorce Hunters from Wildlife Policy. And that's kind of the main focus of this discussion, and it's going to be surrounded by that. So, Jordan, brother, appreciate you joining me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
And again, I appreciate you working with me on snow complex here we had.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all.
So you are are you like an actual writer for MeatEater, or are you like a freelance writer? Tell me a little bit about you, man. We've never met.
Yeah, good question. So I started freelancing for MeatEater all the way back in 2020. So between 2020 and about a year ago now, in 2022, I was writing about an article a week for them. And then in April of 2022, I came on full time as an editor.
Nice.
Yeah. I was happy they were able to make a spot for me.
And that's like a remote position because you're down in Texas, huh?
It is. Yep. Yeah. I'm in East Texas, and then, obviously MeatEater is based in Bozeman. So I try to get up there as much as I can.
Well, good for you, man. That's awesome. I've always been, and I've said this before when I get writers on the show, I'm always, thrilled to talk to a writer, and I'm always interested in this career choice as a writer, and specifically as an outdoor writer. I think it's just I'd love to, I wish I was good enough to be able to do that for a living. I'm not. I have a hard time spelling my name. And so it doesn't work for me, man. But I'm glad we have people like you. Yeah,
well, I mean, it's not something I planned on, to be honest. In college,
tell me about that.
Yeah, in college, I thought I would be an English professor because I loved my English classes. I loved reading and writing, and that was kind of the only thing that I could imagine myself doing. So I actually went to grad school for English, and I'm almost finished with a PhD in English from Baylor. But during the course of that process, I kind of fell into outdoor writing really as a way to fund my hobby. It's expensive, right? As we all know, all the gear and the trips and everything. And so I figured, why not write about the things that I'm doing anyway? So I started with that, and kind of as I worked my way through grad school, looking at the landscape of academia, and also just how much I enjoyed the outdoor writing and kind of the outdoor industry, I decided to pursue that full time. So, when I say I fell into it, that's a pretty apt kind of image because it's not something that I really pursued or planned on doing, but I love it. It's a great job.
So that, obviously growing up, that wasn't your dream, was to be an outdoor writer then. This is just kind of happenstance. Actually, that's a good strategy, man. Get your next deer rifle or something because you wrote some articles and got paid for it. That's not a bad gig.
It's not. Yeah. And I was doing gun writing for a while. And so that's a great gig. I mean, because companies will send you stuff and you can test it, play with it, decide whether you like it. And then, a lot of times they'll give you a pretty good deal if you want to buy it.
Huh. No, that's fantastic. So where did you grow up in Texas?
I didn't. So my background is a little bit complicated. So I was born in Canada, actually. My kind of extended family's from Canada, but I moved down to Austin when I was a kid, about 7 years old, for my dad to go to school. And then he found a job at a college in Virginia. So we moved there when I was about 10. So my parents are still in Northern Virginia. When people ask, where'd you grow up? That's kind of the short answer is Virginia. I'm in Texas now because of school, but also because my wife is from Texas. Her whole family is from Texas. So it was kind of a good spot for us to land.
Do you so you grew up in Virginia and now you're in Texas. What is it about Texas? Because I'm always curious about this. Everybody that's from Texas seems to be really proud of the fact that they're from or living in Texas. And, and I'll be honest, man, I love Texas. When I visit Texas, I love Texas. It's just between the cultural aspect of it. There's a ton of hunting opportunity. The people are just always, they're great to be around. They're what you think of when you're thinking of America, for some reason, Texas is just always that place, and,
Yeah.
And also the great barbecue.
Oh, yeah.
Is Texas kind of like a permanent spot, you think, for you?
I think so. Yeah, we love it out here. We're in East Texas, so we're about an hour east of Dallas, and it's a great place to live. I mean, I honestly hesitate to even recommend it because I don't want it to be overrun. 'Cause, we're getting a lot of people coming into Texas. But yeah, it's great. The people are great. I like the culture out here. And like you say, lots of opportunities to hunt and fish.
Yeah.
Texas, it's a private land state, so you kind of got to navigate that, whether you have a lease or whether you ask for hunting permission or whether you have a buddy who owns some property. But we figure it out, and we get a lot of deer, a lot of pigs, pretty much anything you want to hunt, you can hunt down here.
Is it true? I was listening, I don't remember. I think it was Joe Rogan. He was talking about how there's elk all over the place and you don't even need a tag for elk.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that. I wouldn't say all over the place. Maybe out west.
Yeah.
That's not something that I've looked into a lot.
I'm just trying to build. I'm trying to build up Texas enough so that like out-of-staters choose to go there versus coming here to Idaho.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's high fence operations where you can get elk. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
But there's usually a significant cost involved to that.
Gotcha. I don't know. I might be coming down to Texas in the summer this year, so we might have to grab a cup of coffee or something. So,
yeah.
Well, cool, man. I appreciate you joining me because what I wanted to talk about is this article that you wrote. In the article, I'll just kind of share it here. Let me pull it back up. So, guys, if you're listening, if you jump on the MeatEater.com and go to an article called "Inside the Campaign to Divorce Hunters from Wildlife Policy." So, and I guess not to kick it off with my own monologue here, but the idea, just from the headline, and my take on reading it is there is a concerted effort from these animal activist groups to infiltrate things like wildlife commissions, and legislation, legislators, in an effort to achieve the results that they want to achieve. And sometimes that means, we've seen this in Washington. We just had a big discussion last week with Sportsman's Alliance regarding the wildlife commissioners there that are not even confirmed, and they are going against the grain as what you would think or imagine a wildlife commission is in terms of being responsible for hunting and fishing and just wildlife management in general. So that's why this article really piqued my interest. So, Jordan, can you give us like the synopsis of this article and where like the concept or the idea this came about?
Sure. Yeah. So this is something that, the people in like the wildlife policy arena have been concerned about for several years now. But I think it really kind of came into it was brought to the attention of a lot of hunters last year, when the Wildlife Society, which is it's a society of wildlife biologists, wildlife experts. They have a yearly conference, and they allowed several of these groups animal rights protectionist groups to host a panel discussion. I think one of them hosted a booth. They may have sponsored one of the talks. And this got a lot of pushback, understandably, from the outdoor and kind of hunting and fishing
Sportsman community. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason for that, is because the problem they see is that the way that wildlife is managed in states caters too much to hunters. They think that the wildlife commissions, the wildlife boards they care too much about what hunters think. They focus too much on game species at the expense of other species. And so the campaign is to change the makeup of these wildlife commissions, to focus less on what hunters want and more on kind of something else, right? They're not always totally clear on kind of what else they want, except for they say, we want to conserve all species, not just game species. Now, they don't always acknowledge that oftentimes what's good for whitetail deer, what's good for squirrels, what's good for, name your game species is great for a host of other species, right? Because they all use the same habitat. But that's the general idea. They see hunters as too influential, and they want to balance the scales, basically.
And these are groups like the Humane Society of the United States, the Sierra Club, Wild Earth Guardians. I'm reading right out of your article here.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Wildlife for All.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, if you really want to kind of read the philosophy behind this movement, Wildlife for All is a great website to go to. They kind of articulate what they see as the problem and their solution. And then if you look at like their board of directors, their staff, it's full of folks from the Humane Society, Sierra Club, Project Coyote, all these groups, right? So you can kind of see where they're coming from. You can see what their position is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think I'm gonna actually pull that up so we can kind of come back to that. But one of the bullet points that you have in this article is overthrowing the North American model of wildlife conservation. And you kind of get into, or you kind of detail, some of the benefits of the model, what it's done for conservation here in North America, and the, money it's raised and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I agree with all that. What I get concerned about, Jordan, is like the concept of overthrowing the North American model of wildlife conservation. Why that scares me, if you will, is I do believe if people have been paying attention to some of the episodes I've been doing over the winter regarding this topic, they'll already know this, but there's a lot of concern from my end surrounding like the sportsman community, how we portray ourselves, how we present ourselves, how we interact with each other, and then how we interact with these animal activist organizations or these preservationist groups, protectionist groups like what was that, the name of that one? Wildlife for All. Mm-hmm. The way we interact and the way that we behave as if we are somewhat asleep at the wheel, like this, like there isn't this big problem barreling down the mountain at us. When you say something like overthrowing the North American model of wildlife conservation, I believe that is a potential reality if we don't have some kind of course correction amongst the sportsman community. What is your take on that? Am I off base? Or what do you think about it?
Yeah. I mean, and that was one of my big questions kind of going into this, right? Was how much should we learn about this? How big of a deal is this? And the conclusion I came to was this is certainly has the potential to be a really, really big deal. And it's also not focused just on Washington State, right? Which has kind of become the lightning rod. Bills to restructure wildlife commissions have been proposed across the country. Now, I think it's also true that not a lot of these bills have been successful. Sportsmen they've shown commission meetings, they've shown up to committee meetings, and they're back. And we haven't really seen legislatively these commissions being restructured in the ways that these groups want. But that doesn't mean that that the threat is over, right? Because they can introduce a bill every year. And, it often takes 4 or 5, 6 years for any kind of bill to get enough traction and get through both, legislative chambers. And so it's something that will require, literally eternal vigilance, right? Because the threat's not going away. If anything, it's increasing. And so, I think we've done a pretty good job in the state legislatures fending off these bills, but it's something we should be increasingly concerned with, I think.
Well, I think just like the general public, the non-hunting public, is where a lot of concern comes out of this, because these groups are very effective at propagating to folks like this to kind of demonize the sportsman community. And if we let them be the only ones that have the voice, this is where we're going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble, because it's really easy to take the 5% of bad apples out there that portray the hunting community in a bad light and make it look like that's the majority of sportsmen. That's what makes up the core of the sportsman community, are these jerks that they're poaching, or they're treating wildlife badly, or they're showing some of these questionable things on social media posts that have no real context, as my buddy Chris Rowe puts it. And he's right. And that's where they're going to, when they start infiltrating some of these commissions, or what, besides getting onto like the commissions, can you kind of walk us through what else you see going on in regards to this topic? They're like, what are your bullet points? Changing the composition of state game agencies. Are you talking like beyond the commission itself with that?
What do you mean? Can you rephrase that question for me?
Like, what else besides? So we all know in Washington, Governor Inslee has done a great job at appointing essentially animal activists. I mean, there's no reason to beat around the bush with what like Lorna Smith is. These people are animal activists. They are not looking out for the best interest of hunters. So the commission is one aspect, but there's way more to a state game agency than just the commission. Because there's other ways to, like here in Idaho, our commission got flat out bypassed regarding hunting with mechanical broadheads and lighted nocks, and so that was bypassed through the legislature, and so there's that issue where these animal activists can approach the legislatures and lobby with them to kind of do this wildlife management through the ballot box kind of thing. Which we've seen that in Colorado, we've seen that in Maryland, we've seen it in California and New Mexico, and obviously in Washington. Outside of like appointing non-sportsman type commissioners, is there something else that you think the hunting public should be aware of that is going on?
Yeah. So the kind of the three main ways that these groups push policy that people told me about in reporting this article were through the legislature, right? So just proposing bills that require, for example, in Minnesota, there's a bill right now that would prohibit a wolf hunt even if the species is delisted, right? So that's just like the kind of the most heavy-handed. We're just going to push a bill that is going to require the Fish and Game Agency to take a particular position. There's also the, ballot measures, right? In states where that is a little bit easier to do, or where that's a possibility. They get, however many 200,000 people to sign a ballot measure. It gets on the ballot, and now all of a sudden, if 50.1% of people in the state vote for that, that's the policy now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another avenue. And then the wildlife commissions, the way that it was described to me is, in certain states, they've been unsuccessful in the legislature. They've been unsuccessful with these ballot measures, and so they're turning to the game commissions and trying to put folks who are sympathetic to them on these commissions. That strikes me as more of a long-term type of strategy, but
Yes.
like in Washington State, it didn't take very long. I think Wisconsin's dealing with this too. One election, if the governor appoints everyone on that commission, one gubernatorial election can really make a huge difference. So those are kind of the main ways that they seem to be pushing, and those are the places where hunters really need to be paying attention.
Can you kind of explain again one of the bullet points here? More than one kind of anti-hunting for the listeners. Give us like the synopsis of what that means.
Yeah. So this is something, again, the people I spoke with really emphasized. There's obviously a big threat from the animal rights side, and that's the focus of this article. But game commissions can be politicized in a lot of different ways. And the people that are put on those commissions can have priorities that aren't always in line with people who love to hunt and fish. So one example that people pointed out is if commissions tend to favor landowners and kind of landowner interests over hunters. Obviously, landowners are hugely important in conservation. They're major players. We rely on them to conserve a lot of these species. We rely on them for access. And so it's not about kind of pitting landowners against hunters, but it's another thing to kind of pay attention to. Whenever a commission seems to be really favoring one group of people, it's something to keep in mind. It's something to pay attention to. Another thing that was brought up is kind of a bigger issue at the federal level, which is the Pittman-Robertson funding. And that's really interesting because you're getting people from both the right side of the aisle as well as the left side of the aisle saying we should no longer be taxing guns and ammunition, etc., and using that for conservation. On the right side, they say it's an infringement on Second Amendment rights. On the left side, they say they don't like how guns are tied to conservation because they don't like firearms having an excuse basically to be
be
it's
kind of having any kind of leverage, because of the funding. And interesting, Jordan, with that is it's not even the Pittman Robertson money that is generated. I mean, the vast majority of it is not hunting. It's not hunters, but it would be. I'm always surprised by this approach from some folks on the right. They seem a little blinded by the fact that this Pittman-Robertson Act, that this money gives us a huge seat at the table. And I don't, I've heard a few people try to justify it and, from political standpoint or, some kind of Second Amendment, taxation kind of issue. I don't see it. I'm sorry. I just don't, because I like having the leverage. I like having that big ball of wax in our corner that, is always there. And so that it just is like vexing that. It would even be approached. I mean, I get it from if I was an animal rights activist, if I was an anti-hunting, activist that, maybe I'm the vice president of the, I don't know, Center for Biological Diversity. The first thing I would go after is the Pittman-Robertson Act. That absolutely the first thing I would go after. And so anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent there. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of equally baffled to be honest. It's one of those things that, if the Pittman-Robertson, uh, tax didn't exist and was proposed today, no one would go for it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in place, and the firearms industry, the outdoor gear, like they think it's great, and they're not about to give up, like you say, that leverage. And the fact that someone would propose that, just from kind of a strategic, like tactical standpoint, seems confusing to me. I don't know why someone would do that.
Yeah, I don't either, especially when you look at the fact that these anti-hunting groups are generally the same folks that are anti-Second Amendment, right? And so
Mhm.
when you look at the funding that those organizations are able to generate on an annual basis, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars if you combine them all.
Oh yeah.
Massive, massive amounts of revenue. And if you got rid of the Pittman-Robertson Act, what does that leave us with? The $50 million from RMEF, who can't actually really truly lobby, and these organizations that we have, we were just talking about this on one of my other episodes, like the amount of revenue and the amount of memberships in sportsmen's organizations don't even come close to the numbers on the animal activist side.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a scary prospect. Where do you see that going? Where do you see all of this going, in fact?
I mean, that's a great question. I think it's obviously concerning that the percentage that hunters make in the population is going down, because that could signal kind of a loss of political influence, right? If your constituency, instead of making up 10% of the population, now makes up 4%, that's a pretty serious problem. And this is a question I asked people. I asked, would we be seeing these threats if hunters still made up that 8% of the population? And they didn't really have a super definite answer. Obviously, they seem to think like, yes, we'd probably still be seeing these threats. They would still be going after us through, the legislature ballots and the game commissions. But I don't know. I think that's still a valid question, and still something that I'm kind of trying to figure out. Certainly though, that is concerning, that kind of losing that political capital. At the same time, hunters still enjoy a pretty wide support from the general public. I think, according to these surveys, if you ask people to support rated hunting, it's in the high 80s, which is great. And
the last one was
that,
like 86%, I believe.
Yeah. So that's a good sign. But will that maintain as the country continues to urbanize? If hunter numbers remain this percentage of the population, it's concerning, because the thing that one of the kind of main tenets of these groups like Wildlife for All is commissions to be graphically representative of the population, right? So think about what that means. If hunters make up 4% of the population, that means 4% of the game commission is representative of hunters, which obviously would be like a reversal of what it is now, and terrible for hunting and fishing. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of a rambling way of saying I'm not really sure, but we really need to pay attention.
God, man, can you imagine that? I'd be curious to know. We were just talking about the when they pull the general public, and we're talking about people that are not hunters and not anti-hunters. This is just the general public. The 86% approval, and I think that was within the last year, 18 months or whatever, when that poll came out. I'd be super curious to see if something like that was done back in like the early 90s or like the mid 80s or the 70s. What would that look like? Because I think Americans and not just Americans, worldwide, hunting has always been part of the human experiment. It's just
Right.
it's in our nature. It's what we've always it's just always been there. And there's never been, it's only in recent times has there been an actual effort to get rid of hunting from like a values kind of standpoint, where it's like,
Mhm.
oh, hunting is bad because of this and because of that, and all these fantasies that they throw out there. But my concern, I suppose, because I get, for some reason, I'm just rambling a lot today, buddy. So bear with me. But my concern with this, that it's 86% now, but if the messaging continues to be as consistent, well-funded, and aggressive from the anti-hunting side, how long is it going to take for them to chew away at that 80%, 86%?
Yeah.
Because from 50% to 86%, that's not very much. And if you really think about, what are we talking? 36%? That is not very far. That's not a very tall mountain for them to climb. And
Yeah.
all it takes is I again, I don't mean to keep like throwing hunters under the bus, but it's the bad apples. All it takes is a few of them for these activists to get their hands on to portray that and display that to the public. And that 86% could be, I mean, you've seen how quickly like a presidential poll can go from, oh, this guy has 60% approval, and
Yeah.
then one little event and it's like down in the 40s. It just doesn't take much.
Yeah.
Jordan, from like a personal standpoint, did you grow up hunting, or did you tell me a little bit about your background when it comes to hunting?
Sure. So I did not grow up hunting. My dad, I say he taught me to love. He taught me to play basketball, and he taught me to love reading. Two things that I derive a great deal of enjoyment from to this day. But he was not an outdoorsman. And so this is something that I picked up a little bit later in life, partly through friends, and then partly through a desire to, it's become kind of a stereotypical story at this point, but from a desire to know where my food comes from,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this is something that I picked up a little bit later in life, and obviously it's been great. I've loved it. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot. So yeah, and that's kind of partly where I write from too, is from that perspective.
From that
'Cause I
person,
think
yeah.
if you've grown up doing it, sometimes it's, you've always known something. You've always known, to pay attention to the wind, for example. You don't remember learning it. It's like you've just always known it. And so I try to bring that like new hunter's perspective to my articles, to keep those folks in mind, because, I was one. At this point, it's been a while, but, I still remember being a new hunter.
And when I just kind of switched over here, I'm on your like MeatEater people, I don't know, biography page or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. You've got a ton of articles as well. What do you say, Jordan, to the people that are out there kind of espousing this belief that there's already too many hunters and we don't need more hunters?
Yeah.
And because this has been a topic on this show, and it's been out there for a while, but we were just talking about, we generally speaking, the hunting population of North America is roughly 5%. Those are active annual tag holders.
Yeah.
So it's going to go up a little bit when you talk about the guy that goes deer hunting once every couple of years, or the kid that goes turkey hunting every whatever, but they're not annually out there hunting actively.
Yeah.
So roughly 5%. And I don't have the math as to how that breaks down compared to like 30 to 50 to 60 years ago,
Yeah.
But what do you say to the folks out there that are running around and they're like, no, we already have too many hunters. We don't need more hunters. Is that something you agree with? Is that a concept you disagree with? I'd like to get everybody's take on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of the biggest questions right now, I think, in our industry. Um, and it's a tough one because I kind of understand where both sides are coming from, because even though the percentage that hunters are of the population has decreased, which is a problem for all the reasons we've been talking about, the kind of the absolute number of hunters has kind of stayed about the same,
Yeah.
right? And so if we increase that number without increasing the acreage of land available for hunting, I totally understand why people say, hey, I used to come out here and I was the only one, and now I see five other groups of hunters. I don't like this. And, it's totally understandable why that would be the case. And so it's a tough. I think one of the things that is really important is that we do do everything we can to not allow those huntable acres to shrink. Instead, we expand them, right? So that's why I think this corner crossing debate is really important, so that we can get access to the public land that is we have the right to hunt on, but we just can't access it, right? So increasing the acreage, I think, would relieve some of that overcrowding. But yeah, it's a really tough question. I don't have a great answer.
No, dude, nobody has a great answer for that one. What's interesting about that question is it doesn't matter how you answer it, you're gonna piss somebody off.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
somebody's gonna be mad about it. But I think it's a discussion that needs to be had, because I agree with what you said. The percentage, the per capita ratio of how many hunters there are, has decreased fairly significantly. However, the population has increased. So 4%, or if it's 5% of the public are hunters, active hunters, that number is greater than if in 1960 it was 20% of the population was
Right.
were hunters, and so it's kind of like that, the same way the dollar has decreased in value over the years, and it's the same kind of concept. So, but it is one of those things where we do have to be cognizant. I think that there could be an argument made that there's already enough hunters. And there can be an argument made that we don't have enough hunters. Like there's good points on both of them. And I've got a buddy, Garrett, you know who you are if you're listening to this, that always wants to debate me on this topic. And I initially, like a year ago, I was like, oh no, we need more hunters. We need more hunters. And nowadays I'm like, I don't have a strong opinion on that one way or the other. But what I do know is a course correction has to happen in a sense that hunters, by our very nature, are focused on hunting and not activism, where anti-hunting activists are active activists. That's a mouthful. And so we've got to figure out how we approach this when we're looking at the future of hunting, and we're looking, 10 years from now and 20 years from now, how this looks. Because if we become 1% of the population, I feel like we're in trouble. Like it'll get to the point what you were talking about earlier, where they're going to say, well, the commissioners need to represent the same number. The word is totally evading me here. In proportion to the active hunters. So like, if there's 10 commissioners and, there's maybe a half a commissioner that's pro hunting. You know what I mean? Like, how does that work? And that's what it'll look like. And these people are going to have values that are different than ours. And hunting is going to be a thing of the past. It's just going to, I do believe that this thing is fixable, and the future can look bright. I think it is a bright future, and it can be bright. I just believe if we keep going the way we're going, it's not going to happen. What do you see? Because you're in the industry, Jordan, and you do a lot of writing. I always look at writers first, because I feel like you guys are like on the cutting edge of all the information that's out there. You kind of dip your toes into a little bit of everything, and you know what's going on. You've got a good pulse of the marketplace, or the community, if you will. Like what do you think about the future of hunting? What concerns do you have?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I was thinking as you were talking is the different strategies that we have to combat these things, right? So in my article, I talk about kind of basic political advocacy. So, go to these committee hearings, make sure that your legislators know that they're going to be held accountable to hunters if they vote on these bad bills. That's something I think we all know, and it takes some sacrifice, it takes some time and effort to do it. I think everyone should do it. But another thing I was thinking is part of the problem with hunters declining in terms of their percentage of the population is that fewer people know a hunter, right? So if you hear from these groups, oh, hunters, they're terrible, they torture animals and then they kill them and then they leave them out there and they don't eat any of them. If you don't know any hunters, you might think, oh man, that's awful. I'm going to vote for this policy. But if you know a hunter, if I know that Jim eats the whole animal, if I know that he tries to make as clean and ethical of a shot as possible, that messaging is going to be far less effective. So that's kind of one piece. But what that requires, I think, is that hunters are vocal about what they do, which in today's, depending on where you live, in today's society can be a little bit nerve-wracking, right? A little bit awkward, a little bit embarrassing, but really important. And I think it's more important now than ever to be outspoken about what it is that we do, how we hunt, all of the laws and policies and, tags and licenses that are required to hunt, all of the ways that the money is used, just really in our personal lives and our day-to-day interactions with people, being willing to explain those things, I think is just really important, because that, I think, is a kind of an antidote to the messaging that says hunters are cruel, hunters are evil. We don't want hunters anymore. And so I think that'll be really important.
That's a great point. I love the line. I wrote it down. Fewer people know a hunter will know a hunter. And the reason why I think that that's a great line is because that can actually go two ways, where you're talking about if somebody, and I'll give you a great example, man. I used to work for this was years ago. I used to work for this company. They were a manufacturer, and we would have these video conferences all the time, like weekly, where we kind of get on the Zoom. Like, this was before Zoom got super popular because of COVID, because it was a nationwide company. We all kind of ran our own little territories. So anyway, I had a relationship with this guy that worked at the company in a different state for years. And I knew him. We spoke on the phone often. And then we end up going to this conference where him and I, we get to having a couple of beers or whatever. Come to find out, this dude is like this big time hunter. Like it's back in the day where not everybody has an Instagram and not everybody has, I guess we just weren't really connected. There was obviously Facebook and all that, but, gosh, what year was this? This had to be like 2013-ish, sometime around there, 2014-ish. So anyway, come to find out, I'd known this guy for a long time, had a lot of conversations with him, and I never knew he was a hunter. And the problem with that is why? Like, not that we need to be out there saying, hey, my name's Jordan, and I'm a hunter. I don't want to sound like a bunch of vegans where the first thing that comes out of your mouth is, hey, my name's Joe and I'm a vegan. That's not what I'm getting at. But just when you have, I wonder sometimes if people are afraid to talk about or identify this lifestyle in like their professional environment or church circles or other social circles that they might be involved in. And so that's a problem, because if you knew this guy on a personal level, you knew he was a morally acceptable person. He had a good head on his shoulders. He's kind of a guy you would think is an ethical hunter just because you know him personally outside of the hunting space. So there's that aspect, and I think you nailed it with that. And fewer people are going to know that hunter, and so I would encourage hunters to not be so shy about the fact that you are a hunter. However, the other side to that, because you put it from a standpoint of that would offer activists and non-hunters some context to what a hunter is, right? And it would destroy the credibility of the anti-hunter messaging about how cruel and unethical hunters are. If somebody knows that person on a personal level to understand that that's just not how they are on personally. But on the other side to that, we have this stuff going on social media. We just talked about this last week on the show where, they're cruising down this dirt road in the back of a Jeep chasing an ostrich and just blow it away. And then they post it with no context. So when we're out there running around talking about how ethical we are and how, we're concerned about conservation and we're the true conservationists, hunting is conservation and all this stuff, that destroys our argument. And because the problem with that is that's like less than 1% of hunters that do that kind of shit. That's why it's so frustrating. And so I don't know. I guess I went on a little too long there, but I just wanted to point out I really like that line that you made. Fewer people are going to know a hunter if there are a few, less in the population, to be able to relate that to like a realistic level of understanding as to what hunters are. But there's that other side that we do definitely have to be a little bit cognizant of. So
yeah, well, and I think those personal connections, like having a friend who's a hunter, his or her, like the way that they approach hunting, that's more powerful, I think, both than the anti-hunting messaging, but also I think it's more powerful than the viral, horrible, ostrich hunting video.
yeah,
Right. Because people, they care about their friends more than strangers, like the most obvious thing anyone's ever said. But I think we can use that to give them the truth, to give them good information about what hunting is. And so, yeah, those personal connections I think are really important. You mentioned social media, and this is another kind of question that I'm also a bit conflicted on, right? Because I think that social media, like you say, can be really harmful to hunters, but it can also be a good tool.
Absolutely.
To communicate to people that you are a hunter without, like you say, being it being the first thing in conversation. So you have your Instagram feed that's like your family and random meals that you've had. But then, there's one of you out in the field with a deer. Now, I think what's important there, and not to plug MeatEater too much, but to post that picture of yourself, the grip and grin, that's fine. But what I also like to do, and I don't do it all the time, but is to also post among those pictures the meal that you made with that animal, or with venison in general, because I think people, even if they're not hunters, they support hunting, and the support for hunting goes up if you say, do you support hunting for food, right?
Yeah.
Adding that for food in there really helps people say, okay, I eat cows. It would be hypocritical of me to oppose hunting if they're eating the meat from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So using social media to show people what we do with the animals after that grip and grin, I think can also be really effective.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful way to tell the story of our humanistic connection to what hunting is. And I think that social media, like you said, it can be very damaging but it can also be very positive. It's all about balance and compartmentalizing this stuff, for example, I'm still like a dinosaur and I have a Facebook, right? But it's my personal Facebook. And so I'll post stuff of my, kids or my dogs or our homestead or, complain about the weather. Sometimes I'll post stuff about this podcast on it or whatever. but that the people I'm talking to with on that social media page, they're compartmentalized way differently than like my Instagram for this podcast.
Hmm.
Because the Instagram for the podcast is the Western Huntsman. Here's the show. Here's a cool hunting video. Here's a cool hunting picture. Here's a grip and grin. Here's what we made out of it. That the people that are consuming that content are generally speaking very like-minded. And we share that. I interact with their pages, they do that, and they interact with my page. But going back to like the Facebook, I'm not going to post certain pictures of hunting because let's face it, hunting can be pretty brutal, right? And I've got Aunt Biddy on Facebook or whatever, and I don't want her to see
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, you know. And so I think just having a little bit of common sense, and then Jordan, just to throw this out here to be obnoxious, I also have a Twitter just to be obnoxious and talk shit about Democrats because that's part of what I do.
I
But
think that's what Twitter is for, I think.
there's some value in that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. No, that's awesome, man. I've got, I don't want to keep you too long, man, but I have a couple questions about, working for MeatEater, dude. I'm fascinated by this because I've got a couple friends that work over there,
Okay.
specifically with those, goofballs over at Phelps. Love them both to
Yeah.
death, Dirk and Jason. What's it like working for MeatEater, man? Have you ever like arm wrestled Steve Ranella?
I have not. I have not. I've loved it. I've loved it. And that's not just me, saying what I need to say for my paycheck.
In case HR is listening.
That's right. It's great. I love it. It's the best. Yeah. No, it's been really good. And I think my experience has been a little bit different because I have been remote the whole time. So I'm not in Bozeman. I'm not in the office every day. I do kind of, I write my stuff. I help Ryan Callahan with his podcast. So those are kind of my two main things. But everyone I've worked with has been really great. Spencer Newharth is the person that kind of brought me on. And then I work really closely with Maggie Hudlow, and then of course with Cal. And they've all been great. No
cool.
complaints. As a writer, I enjoy writing for them because I think they're a little more open to somewhat more off the wall topics than maybe some of the other outdoor publications. And so it's really fun. I can pitch interesting, crazy, wacky kind of like historical pieces, for example. And they're like, yeah, sounds great. And so it's a lot of fun.
Do you have like a specific interest in historical pieces, or is that like what every writer has kind of a preferenced niche, or I don't know if I'm even saying that right.
Yeah.
What do you like to write about?
Sure. So my main thing at MeatEater is actually firearms. So I'm kind of the in-house gun writer. So that's my kind of bread and butter, you might say. But then the conservation related articles, the policy related articles, like the one we've been talking about, that's also one of my main focuses. So I write quite a bit about that. And then, anytime there's I hear about a cool story, I usually pitch it. We have this series called Barroom Banter, which is where a lot of these pieces fall into. And recently I wrote about the Australian military launching an official military campaign against emus in one of the states. So that was a lot of fun.
What?
Yeah.
They launched a military campaign against emus?
They did because they were devastating the crops. I believe it was the wheat crops. And so the farmers were like, come help us, please. There are too many emus. And so someone had the fantastic idea of going in with 2 machine guns. I think they imagined that the emus would just kind of stand still and they'd be able to kind of mow them down. But of course, they just ran away.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it was this horrible, embarrassing disaster. And so it was really, really fun to research that and write about that.
Oh man, I'd eat that kind of stuff up. That's fantastic. I found your article too. The Great Emu War of 1932. Is that the one?
Yep, that's it.
Ah,
Yep,
sweet. I love that
yep,
kind of stuff.
yeah.
Well, what's on the docket for the future, man? Are you anything big plans outside of being a writer for MeatEater? Are you looking to write a book? Are you looking what's your writing career kind of hopes and dreams?
Great question. Yeah, I would love to write a book at some point. The topic is TBD right now. But yeah, I can see myself doing that. But nothing real definite at the moment. Just
Okay.
yeah, continuing to write for MeatEater, and then yeah, help Cal with this podcast.
Okay, and I'm going to throw one more at you. Are you ready for this one?
Hmm.
I have periodically people that write in to me or this show asking about, hey, I've always been interested in writing. I'd love to write for the outdoor space, and I'm with Eastman's, and so we do a lot of that kind of similar content creation.
Hmm.
So I think they pose that question to me. But what advice would you give a young individual looking to like work his or her way into the writing, or I'm sorry, the outdoor sportsman community writing space?
Yeah. Um, so I think it's really important to write a lot and get a lot of writing practice. So as an editor, I'm looking for someone who knows their topic, right? But can also submit really clean copy. In other words, can submit articles that I don't have to edit a whole lot, right?
Yeah.
Like, because that's really important. Like you can be the world's best whitetail hunter, but if you submit an article that I have to spend 2 hours every time, fixing, it's not going to work. Like it's
True.
just not gonna work. So focusing on that writing aspect of it, along with the being a subject matter expert, I think is really important. So, find ways to write as much as you can. Find people who will edit your stuff and offer you advice. And then in terms of just kind of breaking in, so I'll tell you what I did with MeatEater. I was listening to the podcast, the main podcast, and I heard Pat Durkin, who is a pretty big outdoor writer in Wisconsin,
Yep.
but he also writes for MeatEater. He's on the podcast pretty frequently. He mentioned that he likes getting articles from kind of prospective, up and coming writers. And I had an article I was working on. I was trying to shop it around, and so I sent it to Pat. And kind of to my surprise, he got back to me. He gave me great advice. He edited my article, gave me great advice, and then gave me contact information for one of the editors for Spencer. I sent it to
Hmm.
Spencer. He was like, "This is not what we're looking for." It was this like kind of personal essay basically about hog hunting. He was like, "This isn't what we're looking for, but feel free to pitch me more stuff in the future." And
Oh,
so,
nice.
yeah, and so I published that other article somewhere else, but then I pitched him articles, I pitched him ideas, and he took a few. And then it was really just about developing that relationship. Again, always submitting articles that they didn't need to edit a whole lot. Being really consistent, getting my stuff in on time, just being a really kind of reliable freelancer. I did that for 2 years and then came on full time. So really it's just, reach out to people, reach out to as many people as you can, have an idea, have an article you can send people to show them that you know what you're doing. And then, just keep doing that until you kind of find a break.
Where I knew you were going somewhere, man, when you're like, he sent back not quite what we're looking for, but feel free to send me more stuff. When
Yeah.
I've submitted to editors, I don't get the second half of that. They just say, that's not what we're looking for. I
Yeah.
wasn't getting the whole, but feel free to submit some more stuff. They were like, no, you suck, dude. Quit writing. until I was able to con a few people into publishing my articles. So that's pretty cool, man. That's solid advice for those of you listening that are maybe interested in that. That's really solid advice. Write a lot and build those relationships and just keep submitting. I think it's great, man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jordan, I appreciate your perspective, man. It's been a good conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I do want to give you I want to give you some big kudos for that article. Again, guys, the article is called "Inside the Campaign to Divorce Hunters from Wildlife Policy." It really breaks down. I think every hunter and sportsman should be aware of this. You guys should read it, and I'm going to put it in the show notes so it's easily accessible for you. So, Jordan, good job on that article. You're a great writer, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, I thank you for those kind words. And yeah, I was really excited to get the invite, and I had a great time.
Awesome. Well, let's keep in touch, brother. Stick on the line for just a minute.
Yep, sounds good.
You made it. That's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure you're following us on Instagram @TheWesternHuntsman and write us a good review at Apple Podcasts. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Stay Western, and I'll see you on the mountain.